thank you very much for having me here. My name is Bartosz Pietrucha, and today I'm going to speak about routing in general, routing in Angular, lazy loading, and more advanced stuff. I'm a full-stack software engineer. I mostly work with JavaScript, TypeScript, and previously I worked with Java. I founded Angular Academy to help people in Poland learn Angular from scratch, to understand stuff, and so on. You can follow me on Twitter at Pietrucha. I've just posted those slides, so if you come up this Twitter account, you will find those slides that I currently present. So, what are we going to speak about today? This is our agenda. We start from the basics about routing and Angular router, so that we are on the same page, all on the same page. Later we'll introduce the concept of lazy loading and how easy it is to implement lazy loading in Angular, because it's basically like a plug-in and plug out. So you can opt in and opt out from lazy loading as you go. You don't need special preparation. Later we'll show how to achieve preloading, so even more performance to your application gain. And router guards. So we will add some security over our routing and routes, that we use special guards object that will prevent some pages or states of the application either open or activate. So in the beginning, let's start from what is routing in general. So imagine that you have an application, a single page application. And what routing actually allows you to do is that based on the URL, the navigation, you can switch an application from a particular state to another, relying on that URL. So it's kind of the way user navigates through the application and the particular content, which is indeed a component, which would dynamically change. In this example, we see that we have employees list under the /employees/, and once the user changes the URL, the state of the application changes in the place where the list happens to be and appear. Now we have a different component rendered. So this is in general how routing in single-page applications work. And how is it achieved in Angular? We have this Angular router, and this is actually talk about it. So in general, in Angular, the router does is it will take the router configuration and match against the particular route, and then produce the router state. So in this case, we have this particular state which is activated, but the whole tree represents all possible states that the router can achieve. So imagine that we are changing the particular state to yet another one based on configuration for the router and the particular URL. So in AngularJS, we had a concept of application state. The Angular 2 and 4 and 5 router is based purely on URL. This is by design because it allows us to later implement lazy loading. So we actually navigate through those states strictly relying on the URL. So how to actually configure Angular router and routing? The most important thing is the configuration. So imagine that we have an application which has, of course, a root component, and there are some sub-components like home component, employees component, admin component, and so on. If we would like to attach those components that are going to be presented on some part of the screen with particular application route. So how do we do this? Basically, the configuration is very simple. What you need to pass a tuple, a pair of path under which you actually have some pattern, because you see that we have employee / colon and ID, which is a variable, and then you say which component should be actually used in this route. And we see that this particular route matches to this configuration. And what's next? We also need a routing module that has to be imported and configured. We do this by router module.forRoute, and we pass the configuration that we just created. And how do we navigate throughout the application? We have some directive which is router link, and we use it to to create a link, a dynamic link that is going to allow a user to transition to the given state. And what is router outlet? Router outlet is a directive that we actually point out to the Angular where particular components should be dynamically placed. So if we saw previously that in some place we had a home component that was switched to some admin component, so it's the place where this component would appear. We use router outlet to point out the place where those dynamic components are going to be placed. There are two ways to navigate throughout the application. We can use a imperative or declarative approach. Imperative approach is this router navigate. Imperative in this meaning that we are using a function call. We need to inject a router, and then we have on this router a function, navigate. We pass a array, and each element of this array is a particular segment. So in this case, we have employees, and the second element in this array is next segment. The segments are divided by the slash. So in this case, it will end in the employees slash and a given ID that we will use to navigate to. The second way is to use declarative approach, so that we will use router link directive, and as the argument to this directive will give our array of segments. This is a micro syntax from Angular because this is a string, but it evaluates to a syntax that is used inside of Angular. So that's basically it when it comes to basic routing. We have some configuration. We say which routes are connected or linked to particular components that are going to appear in particular place in application. But there is a but. We would like to allow our application to use lazy loading, because the approach that we have seen previously will end up in this. This is a main bundle.js. So if we use Angular CLI, the production bundle would look like that. It is a Webpack under the hood, and everything is in one big chunk of JS. You can actually see it using Webpack bundle analyzer, and then you run your build with the stats.json flag turned on, and you can use Webpack bundle analyzer to see how much of space, because those particular modules the size of the particular shape depicts also the size in kilobytes and so on. So our goal is to somehow decouple those modules into separate files to allow and to turn on lazy loading, to have our chunks distributed over to have our modules distributed over different chunks of JavaScript files. So our target in this example would be to take all those modules here and put them into separate files, and then load them as the user navigates through the application on demand. So we will have a main bundle.js, which will have all the necessary starting components that will be presented as the initial screen. And we will have employee module and admin module as the separate chunks that will be loaded on demand. And it will also end up in having those separate chunks. And one of the key things to remember about lazy loading in Angular, that you don't need necessarily to design your application for lazy loading, because this is like an opt-in, opt-out feature. The only thing that you need to change is the configuration of routing. Your application stays the same. You don't have to change logic. You don't have to change the implementation of the modules. The only thing you do, you have to take your routing configurations and somehow tune them up. So in this case, I have 3 different routing configurations for those modules. And what I do here, I remove the path from the module that I want to lazy load and put them into their main routing configuration. And I use load children parameter to point out to the particular file in which my component is located. And after the hash, I also use a module name. So this is the first step. So once again, we remove the path from here, and here we have only the relative path to these employees. So they're going to be like relative to each other. And put them once again, and use load children parameter to point out the file. This is the first step to tune up your configuration for lazy loading. The same happens to admin module. You see that we have empty path, and the path to admin has been moved to the main routing configuration. And of course, we need to, each of the configurations has to be loaded. And main configuration stays, main import for the main configuration stays the same. We have router modules for root routes. And you might ask why we have for child here. It's just because this for root not only configures routing, but also instantiates the router. And we want to have only one router instance per application. That's why for child, again, we'll configure our paths to the routing, but will not instantiate yet another router. So that's important because we don't want to have a couple of instances of the router, because by design it has to be a singleton. And the second step is to remove the dependency from root configuration to our modules. Because if we will not remove our employee module, in this case, which are the ones we configure for lazy loading, from the import statement inside of the root module, they will indeed also be bundled together. So we want to cut off all the dependencies, and the only thing that stays is the configuration which points out to this module. So this is a very important step. And that's it. That's it, because Angular CLI ships with a Webpack plugin which analyzes all your configuration for routing and would know which one you would like to have lazy loaded or not. In this example, you see that we'll have a demo session in the end, but you can see that there are chunks emitted by Webpack. After you do ng build, you will see that the chunks are created out of the box. You didn't have to configure it manually. So once again, you saw that we just switch a little bit of configuration, just a little bit tune up, and the lazy loading would just work. Application logic stays the same. Okay, so we have learned what the routing in general is. We have seen how to configure routing and router for Angular application. We've seen that a lazy loading is also very easy to implement as an opt-in feature, but there is yet another thing, which is preloading. What in this case what we want to achieve is whenever the user starts the application, maybe first of all let's recap what are the benefits of lazy loading. Imagine that we have a very big application with a lot of different modules, and we end up in a big application chunk. And by splitting them into separate JS files, we can defer the process of fetching the JS and initializing them to the moment they are needed in the application. So imagine that the user would never ever open the admin module, so there's no point in downloading it from the server and initializing this part. But imagine that we want to be prepared. So we still want to have lazy loading. We want to have the initial screen loaded very fast because of the very small bundle size. But in the background, once the user started to use the application, we want to pre-fetch, preload all the other modules so they would be ready once the user will open the particular route for the component. So how the preloading would work. Imagine that we start from the main bundle, which consists of the initial screen. Then we bootstrap the application. The application is ready to be used. You can interact with all the things that are visible on the screen. But in the background, you have told Angular router that, okay, I want to be ready once the user would, for example, open the employee module or the admin module. So in the background, we are fetching these JS bundles, and we wait once the user will finally open this particular route. So how to implement it in Angular? Again, it's fairly easy. First of all, we'll make a use of a data argument or data parameter in our routing configuration. So we have our employees. We have instructed it to use lazy loading by load children property, and we make the use also of the data property, which is a generic one. You can assign any data that you need to your route to make use later of it. And second of all, we have something which is preloading strategy. Angular by default ships with two strategies: either preload everything or nothing. But we want to have something more sophisticated. So we will implement our own preloading strategy. We call it selective preloading strategy, that would, based on the value of this preload flag, either load or not load in the background. And how to implement such a strategy? Again, fairly easy. We need to implement an interface preloading strategy, which has one particular method, preload. We are given a function load and a route, so we can make a check if this route is the one that we want to preload, and based on our own logic, in this case we are just checking if the preload is truthy, has true value, and return the load function call. If not, we need to return an observable of null. That would mean that this particular route is not dedicated to be preloaded. And that's it. We have implemented our preloading strategy. We have imported it into the configuration, and we can actually now instrument which particular routes we want to be preloaded. Fairly easy, just 2 slides to explain what needs to be done. And the last thing to learn to make most of Angular router are router guides. So imagine the situation that we want to prevent a particular user under particular circumstances, either activate or deactivate particular route. We have some entity which are called guards, which guard from entering or activating particular routes. So can activate guard can be used to either prevent or allow, based on some our dedicated logic, to make a transition from one route to another. So if the user can open the admin component, we can implement a particular policy. Even more, we have something which could prevent Angular router from loading particular route. Because if users maybe don't have any particular important privileges, there's no point in either downloading the admin module, because the user will never ever be able to open this particular route. So how to implement? There are, in this case, we are using 2 interfaces, can load and can activate. And in order to fulfill the contract standing behind this interface, we need to implement 2 methods. One is can activate, and the second is can load, surprisingly. And here we will just return a fake value of isLog, because our sample, our demo application, would be faking the process of logging in, which will, in the end, just check the particular value of particular boolean. So in this case, if the isLog is true, I can allow the user to activate the given route. This is the only constraint that I'm checking. The second thing is can load, and we are using the same implementation. Based on this value, which we mock a the fact that the user is logged or not to allow the router to load particular lazy loaded module. The last thing is to point out this particular class which implements this logic, and we do this by yet another property in our configuration. So we bind this out service which happen to implement those interfaces in the router configuration. Again, we have our admin path, admin component configuration, and we use can load property to instrument this policy. The same thing happens to can activate. We'll also see all this thing happening in action on the demo session. But you can see that it's just the same action. We just need to extend our configuration with yet another property. Okay, so I have spoken a lot about Angular router, routing configuration, lazy loading, preloading, and routing guards. So let's see how this actually looks like in the real action. So let me open my demo up. I hope that demo gods will be with me today, because there is a tendency that demos never work properly. So we have some minutes left for the demo. Okay, this is the code of the sample application. Let me show you, because it's already working. It's very simple example with two different routes. You can see that it has some route, employees, it presents the list of the users and some forms. Let me get back, and this second path is here. Oh, there, I'm not logged in, so the guard has played its role. But this is not what I wanted to show you. I wanted to show you this little part here. You can see each bundles downloaded from the server. These are the ones that are produced by Angular CLI, which uses the Webpack configuration. We have some vendor, which is the thing that is Angular specific, just Angular. And the most important is for us, is main bundle. It's all our application specific stuff. And you can see that it was fetched as one shot, one file. And what we want to do, we want to utilize lazy loading. So once again, remember that what we need to do, we are changing our routing configuration. So I'm removing those parts of the path, turning them into relative ones. So you see now there is no sign of these employees. The same stuff happens to the admin module. I'm getting rid of those absolute parts. And I will also change the main application routing module with the configuration for employee module with this path and the link or the path to the physical file containing this particular module. The second happens to admin. And the last thing was to get rid of those dependencies. So let's see what happens next. I'm saving all of this. Webpack starts to recompile my files. It has some status here. It's 92%. Let's give it some time to finish this process. Okay, Webpack has completed successfully, and let's see right now what happens. So, did you notice this zero chunk.js appeared right now? So this is, once again, let's refresh the application. I have my main bundle. Okay, this is not the state that I wanted to have. So I'm in my home screen. Application is already running, and I'm changing the state. I'm opening the employees part. And you can see that this small chunk has just been downloaded, lazy load. So this is how it looks like. I'm not loading these parts at the very beginning because they are not yet needed. So let's see what would happen with the second part. Please notice what would appear in the console. You see that the can load returned false. That's why no chunk appeared here. So let's simulate that the application has some logging process, and application will authenticate, the user would authenticate the logging process. So right now, I'm assuming that my logic to answer if the user is logged will tell me, yes, the user is logged in. So I click admin, voila, can load set true, can activate set true. So, and only now the chunk was downloaded as this second chunk here. So it was deferred to the moment it was needed and to the moment it was allowed to be downloaded. So let's get back and see again here. I will again try to open admin module, and you can see that can activate only appeared because can load was not necessary because the particular chunk is already fetched and downloaded. We can also take a look once again on the guards part. You see that I have again switched off this flag, and I'm not allowed to change the particular state into the admin part. That would be it when it comes to those features. We have a couple of minutes left. So, once the demo is done, I would like to, give me a second, to get back to the slides. I would like to thank you very much, and it will be the time for the question, I guess, because we have like 5 or 6 minutes left. But before we go to that, I would like to invite you to Angular Academy training, which is going to happen in Warsaw in October 28th and 29th. So if you like the way it was explained, you can attend my 2-day training that is going to happen during the weekend. And why I believe it's a good option, because you will not only learn Angular, but I will make you understand the internals happening under the hood. So it's not only the training to understand, to learn the framework, but also to understand how it works and why it was designed to be that way. So you are fairly welcome. And once again, thank you very much for attending my speech. Do we have time for questions?
Yeah, 1 or 2 questions. We still have a few minutes. Yeah.
Great talk. I have a question about lazy loading. As you said and showed us, we have to remove those modules that we want to lazy load from import array, right? So is there any reason to export them from the file that we are referring to? Like, do we need still to export ng module? Is it still imported anywhere else?
You are not exporting a module in Angular, you are exporting internals of the module. So if you have a module and it has like some components, some directives, and inside of the module you have this metadata on the module, and you say, okay, I want to have this visible outside of the outside world. So we are removing a module dependency to yet another module, but exporting is something different. On the lower level, you are saying that this component should be visible to the outside world. So these are the 2 different levels.
Okay, sure. Thank you.
Okay, great. The second question. Sorry.
The first one, can we prioritize prefetching?
To my best knowledge, no. It works that way. You just have the preloading strategy to answer the question if or not the particular module should be preloaded. Maybe there is some way, but I mean the mechanics that I showed you doesn't allow to do this. Yes, you just say, hey, is the answer for the question yes or no? Should I load or not? And this is just a function that takes the route and answers this question. So, to my best knowledge, it's not possible.
The second one, the native modules in the browser will change how we load these chunks.
Sorry, could you repeat?
Does the native modules support in browsers will change how we load these chunks?
What do you mean by native modules?
I mean this, like in imports, like in the Node,
I'm not sure.
imports in Node.js.
I'm not sure if I understand the question. You said that does. Okay, let me recap the question. Does native modules influence the lazy loading?
Will it influence? I mean, because we can just import it asynchronously when it is needed, as it's done now in Node.js. So it does.
I mean, it depends how you configure your Webpack, yes? Because for now, we are using this, because we have Angular CLI, and under the hood it has its Webpack configuration, and the way it works right now, as I presented, there is this main module and those sub-modules, and these are the ones that are loaded asynchronously. If you want to have like more fine-grained loading, so some module would be lazy loaded as this A and D modules are, you would need to somehow eject, because you can also eject the Webpack configuration with ng-eject, and I believe that what you are trying to ask is how to, probably what you are trying to do is possible, but you need to mess a little bit with the Webpack configuration and then achieve your goal, because I'm not sure if I get your question properly. Any other? Okay, there's a question.
Can we add optional parameters, let's say like in your example ID, like previous version of Angular? So with this question mark.
Here?
Yeah, but this, I mean this part. So let's say employ question mark ID or ID question mark, let's say route.
I mean optional parameters to the route.
Yeah, exactly. Like in version 1.
In AngularJS.
Yes.
That's a very good question, to be honest.
Because I
don't-
tried, but I can't. It's through error. So my question.
I mean, I'm not aware of this mechanism. I've read a lot of the materials about the new router, and I haven't found those feature. So I would say this is not possible.
So second question, can I use promises in can activate? Because the same I tried and I can't. I know there is a type promise,
Yes.
but
Where was that slide?
the same, if I try to get, let's say, token from server, through error, the same.
Why would you like to use promises if we have observables?
I mean observables. But I try to get a token, and it expect just true or false, but in the same time.
Inside of the function, you would like to use observable. In this function preload, you would like to use observable or not?
Ah, okay. So I see now. Okay.
So you have answered.
can-
You have answered your own question.
Okay.
This is the aha moment, like epiphany right now.
Okay, thank you. I understand.
I didn't say anything. Yes.
No, because I see you use it. Probably I did it.
So I answered your question, not answering your question. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Are we done? Oh, one more question.
I was wondering if we can pass the parameters to the router. Can we pass the reference to components? I was trying to make breadcrumbs or higher hierarchy, and I couldn't reference from, for example, one ID, user ID, from the user of company with particular ID. How could I send it through the router?
Again, let's get back. So we have some configuration. What is your goal? You would like to pass some data here or here?
I want to somehow pass the reference to the parent component to the router to be able to go through the breadcrumbs to the beginning, for example, of collection.
Okay, so you can make use of the you can inject something which is called activated route, and even you can inject the router state, and you can see. Remember this image. At the very beginning, we had something which I call the router state. So what you all the time in your application, you have access to all the structure and the activated route. So probably this is what you are looking for. You can either inject the activated route or the router to get the current router state, and then you can probably walk through this reference.
It goes directly from employees details
Yeah.
to the root component?
Yeah.
Okay.
As we have run out of the questions, and we have probably out of time.
Yes, we are out of time.
So once again, thank you very much.